Everyone trusts money, but everyone in history who trusted money eventually paid the price for it. What if we told you that the thing that keeps your life standing, the salary you receive every month, the savings that make you feel secure, the money you call mine, is not actually as real as you think? What if we told you that governments and central banks can create this money out of nothing, erase its value with a single decision, and still teach millions of people to trust it as if it were a sacred reality? This is not a conspiracy theory. This is the silent truth of the modern world. And the moment that changed everything irreversibly had already happened while almost everyone was asleep. Welcome. This is Money's Destiny. Here, economy, history, and power come together. My dear friend, here all the complexities will become understandable in a fluent way. Let's continue right away. When the date was August 15th, 1971, President Richard Nixon appeared on American television on a Sunday evening and interrupted the regular broadcast. In a calm and authoritative tone, he announced that the United States would temporarily suspend the convertibility of the dollar into gold. That meant foreign governments could no longer exchange the dollars they held for gold, which had always backed them. He said temporary. He said emergency. But it was permanent, and it was revolutionary. That night, the bond between money and reality was severed. The dollar was no longer a promise tied to something tangible. It was only a promise about itself, and a symbol of belief in a government's word. To understand why this matters, we need to rewind the story a bit. After World War II, global leaders had established what was called the Bretton Woods system. In this system, currencies were tied to the US dollar, and the dollar was tied to gold. 1 ounce of gold was worth $35. This system worked because it gave the world stability. Inflation was under control, trade was predictable, and gold was the ultimate safe haven. But by the late 1960s, America was in serious trouble. It was spending heavily on the Vietnam War and on domestic social programs. Dollars were flooding the world, but the gold reserves at Fort Knox were not increasing at the same pace. Foreign governments began lining up. They wanted to exchange their paper for real metal. And America realized it could not keep that promise. Nixon's announcement was presented as a temporary measure, at least that's what was said, but the gold window never reopened. By the mid-1970s, the world had entered a new monetary era without even realizing it. Money was no longer backed by gold, but by decree. Economists called this system fiat money, from the Latin meaning "it shall be." In practice, it meant something simple. Money existed because governments said it did. And for the first time in modern history, the natural limit on how much money could be created disappeared completely. What was truly striking was how quietly this transformation happened. There was no unrest in the streets the next morning. The public did not revolt. Store shelves were full. People went to work and received their paychecks. Life seemed to continue as normal. The illusion was perfect. But beneath the surface, something much deeper had changed. Humanity had stepped into a world where the foundation of the financial system was no longer scarcity, but trust. And history has shown us again and again, when trust becomes the only pillar, cracks are only a matter of time. Because this was not the first time money had been detached from reality. In the past, the Romans learned this lesson at a heavy cost. Coins once minted from pure silver were gradually debased by emperors who wanted to finance armies and grandeur. Emperor Nero reduced the silver content of the denarius by nearly 1/3. Those who followed went even further. Eventually, the coins were nothing more than bronze coated with a thin layer of silver. Inflation rose, trust collapsed. People turned to barter. The economy of an empire that prided itself on order began to unravel because confidence in its money disappeared. Centuries later, this time in China, the Yuan Dynasty tried another experiment. Paper money. At first, it was a revolution. It was light, portable, and made long-distance trade easier. But soon rulers encountered a familiar temptation. Why collect taxes from people when you could simply print the money you needed? Printing presses ran non-stop. But with every new banknote, trust eroded a little more. Merchants began refusing the paper. Inflation spiraled out of control. And this great experiment ended in a quiet but definitive collapse. You see the pattern. Centuries change, technology changes. But the temptation always remains the same. Whenever money can be detached from real value, power does it. And every single time, the people who pay the price are the public. That is why Nixon's decision in 1971 was not an isolated event. It was a new chapter in a very old story. This time the difference was scale. Rome collapsed, but the world went on. The Yuan dynasty fell, but trade continued elsewhere. In 1971, however, the dollar was not just America's currency. It was the backbone of the global system. When it severed its tie to gold, the entire world followed. Currencies were set free. Central banks began experimenting, and governments discovered the intoxicating allure of limitless debt. At first, everything seemed fine, freed from the chains of gold. Central banks lowered interest rates and stimulated growth. Governments spent freely, believing they could always service their debts. Society adapted. Inflation in the 1970s was painful, but in the 1980s and 1990s, things appeared to calm down. A new belief was born. Economies were machines that could be managed through proper adjustments. This was called monetary policy, and this mindset gave birth to successive credit booms, bubbles, and crises, each larger than the last. But history delivers a clear warning. These systems are not built to provide stability. They are built for movement. Debt must grow. The money supply must expand. Trust must be constantly fed. If the system slows down, the risk of collapse begins, like a tuna fish. It has to keep swimming. If it stops, it dies. This is exactly where we are today. A world where money has no backing other than belief. A world where central banks and governments use the printing press like an ultimate weapon. Since 1971, global debt has reached levels that would have been unimaginable in the past. In 1970, U.S. federal debt was about $370 billion. Today, it is over $34 trillion. The numbers are so large they resemble thinking about the distance between planets. The human mind cannot fully grasp them, and this system is very happy that these numbers are not questioned. Think back to the crises we have lived through in the recent past. The dot-com bubble, the 2008 housing collapse, the 2020 pandemic stimulus. Each time, the so-called solution was the same: more money, more credit, more intervention. This was called stability. But it was not stability, it was movement, and every movement has a cost. You can see this cost in the steady erosion of purchasing power. In 1971, 1 ounce of gold was $35. Today, it is over $2,000. In the 1970s, the average home in America cost $25,000. Today, it is approaching $400,000. Wages increased, but life became more expensive. For most people, the summary of this era is very clear. Work more, save less, own less, and pay more for everything. And then the system asks you to believe that this is normal. This is not just an American story. When the dollar abandoned gold, all other major currencies followed. Europe, Japan, China. None of them are tied to a fixed reality anymore. Today, central banks all over the world are playing the same game, manipulating interest rates, expanding debt, and hoping that trust holds. Because the painful truth is this: trust works, until the day it doesn't. And history has shown how that story ends, again and again. Look at Weimar Germany in the 1920s, a country crushed by the burden of war, a government buried under reparations. They turned to the printing presses as a solution. At first it seemed to work. Factories reopened, wages were paid, life went on. Then prices began to rise, first weekly, then daily. People carried their salaries in wheelbarrows. Children made toys out of worthless banknotes. And when trust finally collapsed, the economy collapsed with it. What remained was anger and despair, and the foundations of a much darker era were laid. Consider another example: Argentina, a country that has defaulted on its debt 9 times in the last century. Each time the same cycle played out: uncontrolled spending, inflation, currency devaluation, collapse, then starting all over again. In this process, ordinary people learned how to survive. They learned not to trust their own currency. They converted their savings into dollars, hid them under mattresses, fled into real estate. In recent years, some turned to cryptocurrencies. Because when money loses its meaning, you are forced to find new alternatives. And now we arrive at the uncomfortable question. If history shows this pattern so clearly, why do we believe it cannot happen again on a global scale? America is not immune. Europe is not immune. China is not immune. The system we have built since 1971 is global, tightly interconnected, and rests on a single fragile foundation: trust. Once that trust is shaken, there is no simple way back. Yet despite this, most people never stop to ask even the most basic question: what is money? We accept it as a natural, unchanging, unquestionable reality. But money is not a law of nature. It is a human construct, a system that requires rules, power, and above all, trust. Once, the most valuable things were seashells, salt, then silver, and later gold. Then came paper money backed by gold. And today, what we hold are papers backed by nothing tangible. Often they are nothing more than digital numbers displayed on bank screens. Do you notice the direction? Every step takes us a little further away from reality. Every step pulls us deeper into abstraction, and every step makes the system more open to manipulation. And that brings us to today's threshold: digital money. Around the world, governments are racing to implement central bank digital currencies, CBDCs. They promise speed, convenience, efficiency. But the price is control. Every transaction can be tracked. Every unit of money can be programmed. Every individual's financial life becomes visible within a single system. If money is already an illusion built on trust, imagine that illusion being switched on and off with a single button. Some see cryptocurrencies as a way out. Bitcoin was born after the 2008 financial crisis with the idea of digital gold. Its supply is limited. Its rules are set by code. It relies not on politicians, but on mathematics. In theory, it offers an alternative to unlimited money printing. But it is also volatile, speculative, and still far from being the money of everyday life. Maybe it is part of the solution, or maybe it is just a new chapter of the same story. But the real issue is not gold, not Bitcoin, not even fiat money. The real issue has always been power. Whenever money loses its tangible anchor, those in power become freer. Everyone else becomes more fragile. Governments spend without limits. Corporations borrow recklessly. Banks profit from bubbles, and when the system collapses, the cost is always paid by ordinary people. That is the cycle. That is the trap. And this process began the day money ceased to be real. So what do we do with this knowledge? First, we stop lying to ourselves. We stop saying that debt doesn't matter, that inflation is temporary, that those in charge always know what they're doing. We look at history. We recognize the signs, then we protect ourselves. Not by clinging to a single miracle solution, but by understanding the system as it truly is. By recognizing that it is a mechanism built on trust, and that sooner or later it will crack. Financial education is a shield against this order. Knowledge of economic history is a weapon. True wealth is not just money, it is awareness, resilience, and the ability to remain standing when illusions fade. Because history does not repeat itself exactly, but it always rhymes. Rome's denarius, China's paper money, Weimar's banknotes, they all tell the same story. When trust is broken, money dies. And when money dies, societies are never the same again. The day money stopped being real is not just a date stuck in 1971. It is a warning, a sign reminding us that nothing we consider permanent truly is. If this explanation has given you a new perspective, you are definitely in the right place. Follow me and don't miss out. I will upload a new video for you every day.